So, hi, good friends, good writers, good teachers, and welcome to EDU 540 in week two. So, I wanted to start us out in week two thinking about sentences because sentences really convey meaning in the English language. Even though we talk about paragraphs, we talk about whole essays, we talk about different genres in writing. All those different genres, all those different examples of writing are based on the sentence. And a good sentence and good sentences strung together in a paragraph can really have a tremendous effect on an audience. And that idea of an audience is critical to keep in mind, as I say in our introduction. And the idea of purpose is also important to keep in mind when it comes to writing. So those two particular ideas we're going to be coming back to on a regular basis as we go through the course. And we'll also circle back to some of the ideas that we talk about today, particularly when it comes to looking at the Tompkins book, which I think is an excellent model for what good writing can look like, and how good writing can be taught to all students from pre-K, kindergarten certainly on up to 12th grade. So I want to do three things in this particular mini lesson. I want to talk a little bit about the Tompkins book because I really think it is so valuable, and the way it's structured and how it develops is an important part of learning to teach writing, I think, and it will be for us. Then I want to look a little bit at the sentence dive and sort of some of the work that you're going to be doing with sentences this week to try to clarify some of the benefits and some of the ways in which you can learn more about writing and writing for meaning, writing with intent and purpose for an audience by looking at sentences directly and kind of analyzing them and working with them in different ways and manipulating them. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the poetry lessons, which begin week 4 in your workshop groups. And I hope I can clarify for you how those lessons are going to work and what your responsibilities are as far as submitting those poetry lessons to Moodle are concerned. So first of all, let's take a look at Teaching Writing by Gail Tompkins. That second chapter is laid out, as you know, many of you know, but maybe not all of you know, laid out in the same way as the other chapters. There's a case study at the beginning, and I would really suggest that you look at those case studies and read them through because they're very helpful to kind of set the table for what the chapter is talking about. And they give you some good examples and good ideas of how to work with various students on their writing, and develop mini lessons on writing so that your students can become better writers and so that you too can become a better writer. So this particular chapter 2, focuses on lesson strategies. And on page 34 and 35 in the book, those strategies are laid out. Those are the strategies for teaching writing. Those are the strategies that you're going to keep going back to as you're working on writing with your students. So get to know them, get to begin to develop your own repertoire of how you might introduce and design different lessons using these different strategies that are developed in chapter 2 of Tompkins. This week, we're going to look specifically at page 36 and look at that strategy of elaboration, that first strategy. That's going to be our focus because that's how we develop good sentences and how we understand good sentences. So take a look at that specifically. One of the things I really like about the Tompkins text too is the fact that each chapter holds these mentor texts. I don't know if you'll have the availability at a school library to look through some of these mentor texts, but I think in addition to the work that we're doing in the course, and it may come to pass that we refer to some of these mentor texts directly, but if you have the opportunity, take a look at some of these mentor texts in your school library. to get a sense of how they convey some of the important understandings that are in the different chapters that Gail Tompkins works with and the way she develops thinking about teaching writing. So in each case and in every chapter, there are also one or two mini lessons that give you a direct step-by-step model of how to teach writing. And I'm going to suggest that as we go forward, particularly as we begin to look at different genres of writing like persuasion and exposition, you try some of these mini lessons and you think about them and develop them for your students going forward. These strategies that Gail Tompkins talks about in Chapter 2 are largely meta strategies. They're metacognitive. One of the things that's important to think about and keep in mind about writing is that writing is conscious. It's a very, very complicated human endeavor, more complicated than reading, as a matter of fact. And I think that's one of the reasons why teachers tend to shy away from teaching writing. There's a vocabulary of writing that has to be learned, parts of speech, parts of a sentence, so that you can sort of talk about how all these different parts fit together and how they relate to one another. And that's also part of what we're doing this week in terms of looking at sentences. We're also looking at the vocabulary surrounding sentences. So sentences like sentences that have nouns, that have verbs, and use modifiers, and especially those three different categories of words are the different categories that will extend into talking about parts of speech, talking about appositives in the Hockman and Wexler chapter that I'm having you do for your discussion board. So kind of knowing what those different parts are, knowing what to call the different parts of a sentence are going to be important for you as writing instructors. They're easy to pick up. They have a logic, and what they convey is the structure of the English language, because knowing the structure helps us analyze our own writing as well as analyze challenges and difficulties that our students are having. So there are also some great models, some great examples of children's attempts at writing to support the understandings in each one of these chapters. So that's an important thing to look at. And finally, there is a reliance on Writer's Workshop and digital tools. We'll be speaking about and talking about digital tools in some detail week 4 when we look at networked environments. But the idea of Writing Workshop is going to be very important for you to kind of bring forward in your workshop groups, because the intention of those workshop groups is to share writing, share ideas about writing, and ask one another questions about how we write, about the meaning we convey, the kinds of language and words that we use, the sorts of structures that we try to create to communicate meaning in writing. So looking at how writing workshops are used, how writing workshops can benefit students, and how writing workshops hopefully are going to benefit you in the course is also a big part of what Tompkins is about, not just in Chapter 2, but also in all the succeeding chapters. So you're going to be working with that writing workshop model in some detail. So Tompkins is a great start, and I really love the thing she says on page 34, right at the beginning of the chapter. She says, writing is a constructive process, and writers make deliberate choices as they construct meaning. So being conscious, really thinking about what you're communicating and how you're communicating it, is an important posture, stance, foundational understanding that you will need as teachers of writers and also writers in your own right, in your own regard. So, moving on from Tompkins, let's take a look at that sentence dive and let's take a look at some ideas about sentences. So, I really like this book, How to Write a Sentence and How to Read One by Stanley Fish. I quoted in the introduction because crafting good sentences means making good meaning. Clarity, uniqueness, directness, all those things are important. In some cases, brevity can be important. If you think about a great writer like Hemingway and the sorts of sentences that he constructed, every single one of them was deliberate. Every single one of them was poured over. And of course, there are stories about Flaubert and other great writers spending days on single words and single parts of punctuation. We don't have to do that. But we do at least have to have enough consciousness to recognize that crafting good sentences, thinking about how they sound and how they convey meaning, is a critically important foundational skill for all writers. So Stanley Fish quotes Anne Dillard, who's another wonderful writer, at the very start of his book, and she tells the story of a student who asks her, "Do you think I could be a writer?" And she answers, "Do you like sentences?" And the student is surprised by the question, but the point is, you have to like sentences to be a writer, and in a very real sense, you have to like sentences to be a good teacher of writing as well. So look at sentences, look at all different sorts of sentences in what you're reading, in what you're writing, and think about them. How are they put together? How are they designed? So, for this week, among other things in our workshop groups, I have you looking at what's called a sentence dive. The Fillmore and Fillmore article that I'm having you take a look at focuses on this idea of the sentence dive and on the idea of really explicitly teaching how sentences work. The article is designed for English learners and English minority students, but the same is true across the board, and everybody and all students benefit from this kind of approach. So the kind of the guiding question is, how does changing language change meaning? And I'm giving you this sentence from Raskell at the beginning of your workshop group. And then there are a series of questions about the sentence. The last set of questions is what I've left for the reflection for this week. So make sure that once you complete your workshop group, hopefully by Friday, you'll have an opportunity to jump in and answer that reflection, thinking about the sentence dive and what you learned. But fundamentally, what the sentence dive does is it looks at the sentence. What does it mean? How can it be divided up? What's another way of saying what the sentence says? And how can this sentence be used and kind of develop structure for our reading and writing? What are the chunks of the sentences? So, what are the nouns and their modifiers? What are the verbs and their modifiers? What are the kind of subordinate clauses that begin with which and that? And how do they work? How would we draw some of these things? How would we sketch some of these things so that we come to understand them in different ways and by way of different intelligences? And finally, questions about the words themselves, synonyms, what they mean, what are other words that can stand in for those words, and developing an appreciation of the vocabulary and the sentence on that most basic level. So that's the sentence dive that you're going to be doing with your workshop group. I'm going to ask each of you to answer all the different questions that are posed here for that particular sentence. And I'm going to have all of you, kind of dialogue with each other about how these different sentences work. or how that sentence works. And then potentially you can utilize the sentence dive for other sentences that you're working with your students. Always keeping in the back of your mind that as you're teaching writing, you want to be explicit, certainly. You also want to create models, as Tompkins says. You want to develop students' understanding of all the parts you want to of the sentence. You want to help develop students' understanding of how they work together, of how they can be changed and how they can be manipulated. So try that out, see how it works, and hopefully you'll be able to apply some of these things. I ask for some of that thinking during the course of the week, applying lessons, applying ideas, particularly out of Hockman and Wexler, which also looks at sentences in that sort of minute detail from another perspective, but how you would apply some of those things to your students at your grade level. And the thing is that sentences exist and that kind of meaning communication exists from pre-K up to 12. Even simple sentences, direct sentences, pictures that stand for sentences can be analyzed in some way by younger children, and the same kinds of techniques can be developed for students who are older. So we're trying to create strategic writers. You're hopefully becoming more strategic writers who are conscious about the decisions that you're making. Every single sentence is a series of choices, word by word, chunk by chunk, and really being conscious, being aware of what those parts are and how those parts work together in a sentence to develop meaning, develops good writing. I mean, that's really the key. And that's what made Hemingway and Steinbeck and Flaubert and all these other great writers the kinds of writers that they are. And we can do the same thing. It does take effort. What it really takes is developing the habit of consciousness about what we're writing. So that's what's intended by that sentence dive that you're going to get into in your workshop groups. And that's intended with all the activities that I've put in for you for week number 2. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is the poetry lesson, which is going to come up in week 4. So there I'm going to ask you to select a poem. Now, the poem can come out of the Rotzheim book, the great book of poetry, so that, because in there, as I said earlier in my introduction to week 1, there are all kinds of poems, there are all kinds of lengths, they're by all kinds of authors. Don't restrict yourself just to those poems. You may find yourself remembering some poems or finding some poems that you'd like to base your work on and your lesson on. That's entirely up to you and how you want to do that. However, focus your lesson on a poem, and in that lesson, make sure to include writing, at least in a couple of different ways. Okay, writing during the lesson. So trying out some of the ideas of the writing, creating some sort of an introduction that involves writing and self-expression of some sort, and assessing some sort of result. So creating some sort of result that you can look at and assess at, and you don't have to create a rubric or anything, but just some sort of a product, right? So walk us through the process of understanding the poem, the process of writing with some idea out of that poem, or some important meaning that you drew from the poem, maybe some important principle of the English language that you can develop through the poem. Have students writing during the lesson and write during the lesson. So your workshop group is going to participate in that. You're going to leave the video on in your workshop group so that your workshop can try it out with a worksheet and a set of questions and then a final product. And then you, as the person who delivers the lesson, can kind of get back in and look at what your workshop group has done in relation to into the poem and to the ideas that you've tried to convey through that poem. So provide a link to that video. Have your students take a look at it, have your workshop group take a look at it, and then work through, you can work them through whatever affordances or Google Docs or however you want to administer those particular lessons to have your students try them out. Okay, so that's the idea. You're gonna sort of teach it, and then your students, your workshop group, is going to learn it, and they're going to express themselves, and then provide a product that you can go in and take a look at and comment to if you choose to. So that's how those poetry lessons are going to work. I can also share with you, and I will leave in your resources for this week, a really nice lesson that Nicole Deneen, who now teaches down in Canisteo, created. She was Nicole Caparulo back when she was in EDU 540 with me and a few of her colleagues. And she focuses on preposition poems. So she teaches prepositions. She gives students a model of a preposition poem. She has students kind of memorize, think about, and kind of work with prepositions. And then she has them create a preposition poem. That's the idea. So I'm going to leave this PowerPoint in the resources for you for week 2 so that you can take a look at it, maybe draw some ideas. If you have additional questions, ask me, ask one another. And certainly I'll try to get back to you to give you a hand with some of these things. But do take a look at this resource that I'm providing you as well. Okay, and hopefully that will give you some direction as a pretty good exemplar. All righty, so that's it for this week. If you do, I hope you enjoy, and really work it a little bit. Really kind of think about it. Don't pass over things and sort of give curt or brief or unthought or ill-thought answers. Really kind of think about the sentence and what it is and the meaning that comes from sentences and how they're so important to good writing, and develop that kind of consciousness for yourselves. So that's the story on week 2. Thanks a lot for joining me. I really look forward to diving in and taking a look at your work. I really loved your work in week 1, and I'll be back in to take a look at more of that in the days to come and kind of give you some response. So take care, enjoy yourselves. I hope things are going well. I hope your teaching is going well. I look forward to talking to you in person next week when we look at the assessment of writing. And for now, I'm going to say goodbye and enjoy the days.